Welcome back everyone to the channel. I just want to say I appreciate you guys being here for just a couple minutes of your day. I appreciate you guys. This is going to be like probably a longer video. My assumption is probably going to be a little longer than usual. But this is a revisiting series that I want to incorporate into my video or my channels. It's going to be like revisiting so-and-so as an adult. And this is actually going to be the first one I do, which I'm pretty excited for. And that is going to be Spiderwick Chronicles. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers Spiderwick Chronicles. This book came out, I think it was like 2006 or something, when I was like 10. I was like 10 years old. I was just a young boy, full of adventure, happy, and now I'm an adult and I'm reading children's books. That should tell you something. I decided to do Spiderwick first because, for one, it's 5 books and they're all like this big. And they're all like 100 pages, and they're pretty quick, easy reads. Like, they're really small books, so I decided to do this first. I have plans for other ones, but I wanted to try this first because this is the first book series I ever read as a kid. And fun fact, I didn't read a lot growing up, so there's that. But Spiderwick was one of the only books I read, and then there was a couple other series I read, which I will want to revisit them again as an adult, which I will eventually, and I cannot wait. So one thing I noticed, the Spiderwick Chronicle started off with the typical thing for young adult books where the main character is always a bad kid. He's always a delinquent, he likes to fight, and it's always an issue like that, and it's always a single mom, and it's always with the father figure is gone. I kind of remember that for most of the books I've read growing up. One starts the same way. You have the mom, and you have the 3 kids. You got Jared, Simon, and Mallory. Mallory's the oldest of the 3, and Simon and Jared are twins. And right off the get-go, the narrator tells you exactly how each character is. Mallory likes the fence, Simon wants to be a veterinarian, he loves animals, and Jared apparently likes to fight. And he only did one fight, and they're like, all right, we've had it, we're moving. After their dad left, that's when Jared started having his issues. So then they move into this old house that was owned by their aunt Lucina. Now their aunt is now in a nut house. With this going on, the rest of the house is like destroyed and old, and it's just not good. Throughout the house though, they start noticing weird things are happening. Like one part, they are in the kitchen and they can hear something running around, and Mallory grabs a broom and like smashes the wall with it, and inside is like this like nook cranny of like a bunch of just toys. So they just destroy it. The rest of it follows through, where Mallory woke up one day and her hair is like tied up around like the headboard of her bed, and then they had to cut it, and they blamed Jared for it. Well, their mom did, which I was like, okay, if this kid did this, she would probably have, like woke up, right? Like, I feel like, you know how long that would take to do it if he did it? Anyways, it's a kid's book. And eventually what happens is they find a dust watcher, I think that's what it's called, is where you put food in there and you wheel it up. It's like what they used to do. Found one, and Jared went and found a secret room. And in the secret room, he found like notes and stuff, and he was like trying to tell them like what it is. And of course, they didn't believe him. So throughout this, he finds this poem. This poem's giving him hints. So he goes to the highest floor in the house, and under like this cabinet chest, he finds the Spiderwick Chronicles. Now, Spiderwick is his other family side, and that's actually really interesting. It's from Arthur Spiderwick. This is how he learns what bogarts are and fairies and all this. And of course, he thinks they're real. Everyone else is like, Well, Simon was like, I sort of believe him, I kind of don't. They're 9 years old, so to me, I feel like if I was 9 and I was reading this, I would definitely think it's real. And that was just like what I was thinking. Like, when I was reading these younger books, I was going into the mindset of like, if I was their age, I would definitely believe this. So Simon figures out how to catch a bogart, and that's what he thinks is terrorizing them, because they would wake up with bruises and cuts and stuff like that. Like, this thing is like a menace to society in this house. So then he sets up a trap, but his mom catches him before he could do it. And the next morning, the kitchen's completely destroyed. But Jared gets to find these little footprints on there, and he's like, oh my gosh, it's a bogart. And Simon actually sort of believes him. And what happens is they go up into that secret room. They find like a hidden door to go into the secret room. And they build a birdhouse, put it up there, and they write a note to the bogart. Finally, towards the end of the book, they go in there and they notice that the letter's gone, and a regular room. And then they finally have someone speak to him. I think it's called I kept pronouncing it a mannequin, but like, I feel like it's not a mannequin. It's mannequin. I think that's how it is. Oh well, it's another little fairy, and he was like the size of a pencil, and he has both the mice that Simon brought with him at the beginning of the book. Forgot to mention that. Brought with him. They're like, oh my gosh. And that's how the book ends. Now, with the book ending like that, I kind of forgot that this book series is basically like parts, and if you just mashed them together, it could have been one whole book, which is fine. So now, I gave this like a 4 out of 5 stars. Actually, for a reread, it was fun. But I'm actually going to give all my final thoughts of each book at the end of this video. So let's get into the book 2. Alright, so now we are doing book 2, the Spiderwick Chronicles, A Seeing Stone. So this book kind of leads off like about a couple weeks after book 1. And at the end of book 1, you meet a character that is now named booktok, which is like the little elf guy. Right off the get-go, the book starts off with, of course, Jared getting in trouble for staying after school because he was getting made fun of for drawing these creatures, and he got made fun of, so then he ended up just fighting a kid, so on and so forth. Typical start. Gets home super late, and it's him, Mallory, and Simon. Simon's like, hey, where's Tabs, which is a cat that Simon finds. Simon tries to find the cat while Jared goes upstairs to do like drawings, because what he wants to do is draw really good and then put it in the Spiderwick book, which I think is actually a really cool idea, that he wants to continue doing like research of what Arthur was already doing. And he looked outside and he could see Simon getting attacked by, well, nothing. And then all of a sudden Simon's gone. And booktok tells him it's goblins. And it's goblins, goblins, goblins. Of course, Jared can't see them, and he goes to the shed with Mallory, and booktok shows him like the seeing eye, the seeing stone, that you can actually see these things. And I think that's a really cool concept, that you can actually see things with like a certain like equipment. Like you can't, you're blind to the eye without actually seeing it. It reminds me a little bit of like Percy Jackson, where in Percy Jackson can't see it, like humans can't see it, like creatures and stuff, but like gods and demigods can. I think it's a really cool concept. While that was all happening, they get attacked by goblins, and Jared and Mallory fight the goblins, and they don't kill them, they just beat them with fencing swords. And then they're like, all right, we gotta go save Simon. So they just go off to the woods. Mind you, this all happens in a day. Everything that happens is in a day, which is actually really interesting. So they're like walking in these woods, run into a troll, and they trick the troll to not mess with them, essentially. In a way, the troll's like, oh, I'll turn my back from you. You want to grab your sword? And they're like, nah, we ain't gonna do that. And Mallory was gonna go do it, but Jared kept telling her, he's like, no, don't do it. And he shows her, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm not messing with that thing. I just thought that was a really funny concept. And then they go to this bonfire where the goblins are, and there's a griffin in there, which was really cool. And then you get to see Simon and then this hobgoblin, which is named Hobsqueal. And Jared goes up to try and save Simon, and Hobsqueal's like telling him, hey, you gotta let me out or I'm gonna call them. And then, so it's one of those things that's like, you need to let me out or I'm gonna throw us all in here, we're all gonna die. And Jared was like, well, if you do that, then I won't save you anyways. So I'm gonna save Simon, then I'll save you. And what happens is, well, he does save Simon, and then Hobsqueal spits in her eyes. And I'm like, that's disgusting. But I remember when I was younger, I remember that a lot. And I remember that happened to Mallory, not to the boys. So when he didn't spit in her eyes, he spit in like this cloth and he rubbed it in her eyes, and they were able to see everything. And eventually what happened is they freed Hobsqueal, and he spits in Mallory's eyes, so she's able to see as well. And the only way they will not be able to see these things is if they lose an eye. I'm like, oh God, that's disgusting. And through this, you get to feel a little more about this book, see more of the world, the fantasy part of this world, which is a really interesting thing to do. And when they are done with this part, they, rescue Simon, and then they rescue the griffin. And at the end, they take the griffin to like their barn, like the horse stable. And that's where the griffin is. And the book ends where the mom's like, where have you guys been? It's so interesting the way this is written compared to like the first book. I just was taken back with the pacing and everything in this one was just completely different, and I really enjoyed it. So like I said in the first part, I'm going to talk about the whole series as a whole and break down each one of how I feel about them all and probably rank them after. So we're going to get into the third book. All right, so we are on the third book of the Spiderwick Chronicles, and that is Lucinda's Secret. I'm actually having a blast reading these. I'm just putting that out there right now. This book leads right off of the second book, which I've been noticing they all have been doing that. In this one, everyone's trying to figure out the book, because in the second one, there is like threats. They're wondering what is going on, and they're going to be getting an attack continually. And Mallory's like, we need to destroy the book, and she wants to get rid of the book. Jared, of course, doesn't want to. It's like his prized possession. And of course, they are going to be arguing over it. And I think that's a pretty interesting concept, because I kind of, in this spot, I do agree with Mallory, because it's like, yeah, you guys are like having near-death experience since this book, and you have been warned plenty of times that this book is like a threat for your lives. So I do agree with what she's saying here. But Jared did make a point, and he said, let's go talk to Aunt Lucinda. And I was like, ooh, this is going to be interesting. My memories start coming back with this, because I remember plenty of stuff in these books, but I couldn't remember which books this is. And this is the book that's basically with Aunt Lucinda, and she like talks to him and tells him about Arthur, her father, that one day he just disappeared, and she talked about how she was getting like tortured and everything in this house for this book that she did not know it was still there or not. That's why she actually ended up in the nut house, because their grandma cousin ended up putting her in the nut house because of these reasons. And I sat back like, dang, that's so sad. Like, I really thought that was a really sad moment when I saw that. But when I was reading, I was like, damn, dude, that is sad. Went to give her the book to show her, and it's a cookbook, because Temple-Tack is still mad at Jared from the last book. And it was a cookbook, so they're like, oh crap. So they ended up going back home, and they were trying to find where the book is at, which makes sense, because this book is like, where is it? But they ended up finding a map of what Arthur made, and instead of trying to find the book still, they just go out to the woods to try and figure out this map. And when they go out to the woods, you meet a Pakuka, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a shapeshifter. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a really cool design. I thought it was interesting. It was like a spider monkey body, but has like a cat head with long. It was cool. I thought it was a really cool animal. So I thought that was a really cool thing. And it was like speaking riddles to them. And they realized everything's opposite when they were out there. So they swapped their shirts and everything. And they figured out that was the opposite, and they were going in circles. And then they meet elves, which is actually also really cool that you got to meet elves. And while they were talking to elves, the elves also wanted the book. And then they were describing how this book is created for evil, and so on and so forth. Jared gets caught, and he's like, does a trick with Simon to manipulate the elves to basically release them. They release them, and then they go back home. I thought that was a really interesting way to like close the book. So I'm wondering, I'm trying to remember all of it now. Like, it's slowly coming back, because once Jared left and was heading back to see his two siblings, the Puka was back, and the Puka like made like a rhyme talking about how basically Arthur might be with the elves. Now, if I can remember, I'm pretty sure he is, and you talk to him at the end of the book. I could be wrong though. It's been a long time since I've read these books, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But all in all, I was enjoying it. Like I said, I've been enjoying all these, but I'm going to talk about all of them at the end. I'm just doing like little summaries, and then at the end of the fifth book, I will talk about all the books, and I will actually rank them, and I'll just give you my full-on opinion about the whole series as a whole. So let's get into book 4. All right, everyone, this is the 4th book of the Spiderwick Chronicles, Ironwood Tree. Reading this, short, just like the other ones. I forgot, this is where they introduce dwarves. Now, each one of these books, after you finish one book, they actually show you in the back, like, cool, like, pictures of, like, this, which is, like, introductions to, like, what's going to happen in the next book. little spoilers. So like to me, I just kind of forgot there's like dwarves in this, so that was cool. This book has dwarves. Now this book starts off where the kids are still missing the field guide, and they go to a fencing match where Jared fights not Jared, which is like a clone, and Jared pulls out a knife. We knew like fairies are affected by iron, and he gets caught, and then he might be getting expelled and be moving home, moving with his dad. They're like, oh my gosh, we gotta find Mallory. Mallory gets caught there and she gets taken away. So the two boys are looking for Mallory. What happens is Jared actually is kind of rude to Simon throughout all this because of like what happened where Jared's aggression stuff is actually like taking out things on his brother who's not doing anything. Simon's actually a really good kid in this whole thing, and clearly Jared's the bad kid. So they're doing a pretty good job of just showing the difference between the two of them throughout this book, and I really enjoyed it. But this one is the boys go to mines. Sure. So the boys go to the dwarf mines, the Ironwood Tree, title of the book, and then they find dwarves there, and what Jared does, which I think was a pretty smart idea, he grabs an old math book and puts it in a bag and acts like this is the Spiderwick book to confuse the dwarves. And then they go and try and save Mallory. And they find Mallory, and she's like in a glass case, and she's like has a sword, and she's like all done up. The dwarves are telling her that she is now going to live forever, so on and so forth. The boys like, we'll give you the book for my sister. And the dwarves did it, but the dwarves are like, well, you never said for your freedom. So, yeah, and then they get captured. And then throughout this whole rest of the book, the boys and Mallory are escaping the caves. And they finally do. And they get up out of it, and then they see Morgrath. That's how I was pronouncing it. Morgrath? It's an ogre. The way that they have drawn it in the book actually looks really good. And I'm actually pretty excited to get into the book 5 just to see what actually happens. Like I said, it's been a while. At the end of the book, Morgrath actually, when he speaks, Jared recognizes, oh, that was sounded like the twin, the not Jared. I was like, oh yeah, because in my head I was like, I wonder what's gonna happen. And then you find out it was Morgrath. So I was like, very good. It was actually really interesting to get into that. And of course, they leave it right off to where Morgrath and the goblins kill all the dwarves, and the kids are all running home, and they're like, we have to tell Mom. And they're like, Mom's not gonna believe us. I'm like, we have to tell her. And I'm like, why are you telling your mother? Why don't you get like the elves? But yet again, they couldn't because the elves, they had beef with the elves in the last book. So I'm like, I can't wait. I'm actually pretty excited to get into the 5th book just because I don't know what's actually gonna happen. It's been so long, and I really can't remember what happens in the 5th book. So I'm actually pretty excited. So speaking of that, let's get into the 5th book. All right, we are finally here. We are finally in the last book of this series. I want to thank you all for being here with me at the end of the series. Finally, 5th book, The Wrath of Molgrath. Molgrath, I think that's how you pronounce it. So this book was pretty good. So just to sum up the plot of this book pretty quick, and then I'm going to talk about my actual thoughts about the series as a whole, and then that's it. So this book starts right off from book 4, which has been a reoccurring theme for the series as a whole, and I'm actually pretty cool with it. I like that. It just feels nice. It doesn't feel like, oh, I wonder how long it's been. It's just like, boom, we are here. And that's what this book does. So the kids all go back to their house. Their house is destroyed from Molgrath and some goblins. And they see on the top of the house that Byron, the griffin, is chasing a goblin. So they go up there and they realize it's Hogsqueal. Hogsqueal tells them what happens. Jared's like, I have an idea. So he goes to the elves and with the elves, he actually somehow gets to talk to Arthur, which is actually a pretty cool thing. And Arthur doesn't actually know how long it's been. And he tells Jared, he's like, oh, it's only been a couple of months, but it's actually been like 60 years. And he has no idea because he's locked with the elves for all eternity. And I was like, that's actually kind of interesting. So when you meet Arthur, he's kind of like rude. He's not a nice guy, because in my head I actually expected Arthur to be like a nice dude, but he wasn't. So there was that. But Arthur did tell Jared how to defeat Molgrath, which was actually a really cool addition to the story, because I was like, I wonder how they do it. and now you know. Jared leaves the elves and he meets Mallory and Simon on Byron the Griffin, and then they fly to the junkyard. And Timbletack's with them, and so is Hogsqueal. They go there and they fight goblins and dragons. And mind you, I'm not a big fan of how they did the dragons in this book. They're just long snakes. I'm not a big fan of that. I like the more of like, they're like big with wings and legs and stuff like that. I kind of like those dragons more than like the serpent kind of dragons. And I know there's like lore with dragons that are like that, but I'm not a big fan of them. That's just a little pet peeve of mine. But you get to see the dragons in about one chapter, which was pretty cool. The Griffin does end up just killing most of them, so I'm like, okay. They actually get to meet Mulgrath. And Mulgrath, when you meet him, he's actually the kid's father, like, at first, because he, like, looks like the dad. And then they figure out, oh, that's not him. And Mulgrath gets chained up, and he shifts into a bunch of things, and then he turns into a bird to fly away, and a Hogsqueal eats him. And that's how they defeat Mulgrath. And at the end, the epilogue was actually pretty good. Cinda actually moves in with them because they realize, yeah, she's actually not crazy, so you can live with us now. And I thought that was actually pretty cool. They do that, she ends up living with them, and she's just having the time of her life. She had like a hump back in the third book because she was cursed from Mulgrath, and since he was dead, she actually was able to stand straight again. So I was like, oh, nice. They finally go back to the elves and give the book back. And they actually meet Arthur. Arthur actually talks to Aunt Lucinda, and they have a good little final moment, and then Arthur just turns to dust because he steps out of the elf area and turns to dust forever. And that's how the book ends. So my thoughts of this series as a whole was actually pretty positive. There's some things I'm like, oh, okay. This could have been one whole book. It would have been like 500 pages, but I understood it's for kids. So that's why I was like, oh, okay. It's not something I need to worry about too much. But yeah, this was a really quick, easy read of a series. Like, for palate cleanser wise, I would recommend this book all day. The characters themselves are actually pretty generic. They're like, I always notice with kids books or like YA novels, is if you have a character that has one personality, they just ride with that personality all through the series or book, no matter how long it is. That's their personality, and they're not changing. And that is one thing that does happen in this book. The characters kind of have growths, but most of the time, they're just kind of the same character from the beginning to the end, in my opinion. There is some books that do have really good character development, good character growth, but in this one, and most of them, not really, which is totally fine. I'm not like saying, oh man, it needs to. I understand this is a kid's books, and these are 9-year-olds and a 13-year-old. So I'm like, I don't have high expectations while reading this. What I will say though is I would actually recommend this to people who like want to reread some kids books. If you guys want like quick palate cleansers, if you're tired of reading those long epic fantasy novels, or just like those just big books in general, this is a great series to get through. I mean, you could read all of them in a day. No joke. I could have, but I decided to pace myself and just read one out of the blue. And then I would record. You guys all saw the previous ones. I actually really like that element of doing it this way. It was just making everything a lot easier for me to read them. And sometimes I'm like, I don't feel like reading a big book. So I just picked up one of these and just read them. They're really short. All of them are about 100 pages. So I really enjoyed it. I feel like if you guys have kids, I think kids can definitely read this. I think if you have like a 9-year-old, give them this book. They can relate to Simon and Jared because they're 9 years old as well. Even a 13-year-old would be fine with reading it. I just feel like when I'm reading this, if I was like a teenager, I don't think I would have as much interest in this book as I would as like an 8-9-year-old. But all in all, this is a really fun series. I give it like a solid 4 across the board for the series as a whole. Now, my favorite book is the third book. I think it was the best one, I think, out of all of them. I think the only thing I didn't like with the ending of this book is they hyped up Mulgrath a lot in book 4 and obviously in 5 and a little bit in 3. And it just fell short because you only got to fight Mulgrath for about a chapter. But when you're reading these young kids' books or like YA novels in general, most of the time, the final boss is only like maybe a couple pages long, usually. And I don't really blame that for them. So in general, it's not like something where I'm like, oh, where's the epicness? You know, I don't go in there expecting that. But when I read these adult fantasy novels, I expect these giant epic battles and stuff. So with kids novels, I usually just go in with an open mind just because I don't want to compare Spiderwick to like the Stormlight Archive, you know? I don't want to compare the two because you can't, you know? So that was like my only gripe about it is I'm like, I just felt like it ended so abruptly with Molgrath that I'm like, oh, that's it? So that was my biggest complaint. All in all, I really did enjoy the series. I give it a 4 out of 5. If I had to be out of 10, it would be like a 7.5 out of 10, 8, maybe an 8 out of 10, but right now I really did enjoy it. If you guys did make it to the end of this video, I do appreciate it. Make sure you guys check out all my socials down below. Tell me if you guys have read Spiderwick Chronicles growing up as a kid or just as an adult. And if you have read it, who is your favorite character out of the little cast? I actually liked probably Hogsquill the most. Honestly, he was just kind of funny and I just liked the way he talked. And what was your favorite book of the series as well? And of course, make sure you guys stay safe, stay hungry, and tell someone you love them. I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.